All right. Man, we are back. I think my chair is hitting my microphone. We are back. It has been, I feel like it's still last week, Monday. Like the week went so fast. It's just crazy.
Yes,
Well,
definitely.
good day to everybody. As you can see on the screen, we want to shout out, always beginning our stream with the special thank you to our top sponsors, FPEA being one of those. And we are really excited about some things behind the scenes that we can't share with you yet, but we're definitely excited and hoping that there will be some announcements coming out in regards to FPEA pretty soon. When they do, we'll share them with you, and we look forward to doing that. Um, yeah, and aside from that, good day, Brenda. How are you?
Day, half of it's already gone.
Yeah, isn't that wild? I don't know if you can see it, but like I have massive sunburn all over my face from yesterday. I got caught out in the sun. It was cold and windy, but the sun was bright and burny. So I just kind of got caught. We have a million things to talk about. Where would you like to start today?
Well, I would like to start talking about Discovery Day that we drove to Tampa to uh, participate in and how exciting that opportunity is for um, students who might be interested in finding ways to get into a really good career, a high paying career that they can work at while they go to college or work up and not go to college, but it opens up a lot of opportunities for kids. So, Jason, why don't you start telling them what you remember?
Yeah, sure. So if you've been following us along, then what you may have noticed is you may have seen some of the posts on Facebook, on our Facebook page, and going back to November, December of last year, in which we were announcing, hello, welcome to the stream, in which we were announcing a special day that was coming up with a place called M Skills out in Holiday, Florida, which is just north of Tampa. And like Brenda was saying, they focus on the blend between mathematics, engineering, and machining, and all of the kind of like manufacturing jobs that are available and pathing toward those. And the entry cost for something like that is actually relatively low, if not free, because they have grants that they work with the Department of Education to get, and they have all kinds of companies all around the Tampa Bay area and the what county was that?
Pasco.
Pasco, yeah. Um, and they help seed apprenticeships and paid internships so you can get on the job training and all kinds of things like that. And it can be for adults who are switching gears, switching careers in life, or it can be for young people who are starting out looking for their career and they're not quite sure exactly where they're going to land. It's a kind of a good place to go get some hands-on experience, learn some things, get some certifications, and figure out if that's for you. And sometimes they discover they just absolutely love it. And sometimes they discover they want to go back to school, which is also fine. But they know a little bit more about it. We did have the day this weekend. It was Friday, and it was an all day event. They were building little robot arms. I was working on the video earlier, but it took me 3 hours just to get. I was having complications with the video that I took, so it's taken me about 3 hours just to get set up, which is the frustrating part of technology. But lots of video of
But they
them.
will be posted where they're going to be posted.
They're going to be posted on our Facebook page, absolutely. But they had videos of them building from scratch, from like nothing up the robot arm, and then making it operable and using the
Controllers.
controllers that they also had to build from scratch to then like pick up and move and maneuver things. It was really fun. Then they had a couple of interesting. I don't want to call them lectures, but just they had some good interviews with people who helped run M Skills to help them understand what some of the job pathing looks like. There were parents there too, so we split the parents and the kids up. We even talked about maybe if we when we do it again, maybe putting the parents and kids in a competition against each other. That would be really really fun. See who
Build their
can build
robots the
something
fastest.
better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, anyway, yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. Look for some of the content that'll come out from that because it'll be really interesting, really exciting stuff. Special thank you to Kim Hannon because from the Tampa Bay Homeschool Conference. She has just been plugging away behind the scenes. She's the person who really helped pull everything together while Brenda and I are up here in the Capitol lobbying and being at the Capitol and running around and meeting with people. She was down there putting all of the things together. They even had it catered. This is really cool. I didn't know they did this, but they had it catered by Metropolitan Ministries, and apparently they help people who are struggling. They help hire them to make the food, and then there's a portion of the proceeds they just donate back into their it goes into their ministry work, and they have everything from giant catering sandwiches, fruit bowls, wraps, salads, and ice cream. So really really cool. It was really neat to see that. I didn't even know they did that, so that was cool too. They didn't sponsor the event in any way. We just had them cater it, but it was really really cool. It was very fun. The
And our
kids had a
hope
blast.
is to identify other places around the state of Florida that offers training, internships, pre-apprenticeships that we can make available to homeschool students. And we're
Mm-hmm.
looking for kids that really don't know what they want to do
Mm-hmm.
because at that age, 16 and up, there's just not a lot of information in one place that helps kids find a path. And
Mm-hmm.
this is not the only path that they can take, but it helps them see whether this is a path that they might be interested in. And what they were telling us about careers is that manufacturers need lawyers, they need
Right.
other professional accountants positions that work with the manufacturers. And so you may get in, understand what they do, and decide you want to go to law school and, major in that area for law. But
Mm-hmm.
there's just a lot of potential through that. And I know that the governor has something, I think it's called the Sterling Conference, and there are all kinds of career um, and businesses that come to that program. I'm hoping that we can get uh, into that group, attend and meet some of the other businesses that are into um, apprenticeships and opportunities for kids. But if you know of something in your area that is really unique, that offers opportunities for kids to get a taste of a career, be it IT, where they may be doing things that allow kids to come in and train or participate, and they're willing to help them find internships, please let us know because we'd like to make this an part of HEF so that we can help kids find a direction for their life after home education.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's all about setting them up for success in life as we move forward. So, yeah, if there are any and of course, if you do have something like the PEP scholarship, it does count as a field trip. So, it's definitely something that you can get reimbursed for. So, that's even cooler. Um, all right, Brenda, what's next? Where do you want to go next? There's so much to talk about.
Well, let's talk about what we're doing.
Okay.
Um, I don't think we've really filled in our audience on HB 1403. We've
Right.
talked a lot behind the scenes and we've talked with other people about it in specific language. But the bill now has gone through 3 committees and it's ready to go to the floor. And Jason and Crystal and I have spoken at each of the committee meetings, trying to help the legislators understand that this bill doesn't work for PEP parents. And the bill itself was fine. And then there were some news articles that really distorted what was happening and what was going on. But of course, the media always comes against anything change in education. They're always public school oriented, and public schools are not going to go away. But every child doesn't fit the same mold. And so we've tried to create and work with and help create opportunities such as the Florida Virtual School. I mean, there were people going, no, we can't do that, but good night. It has worked so well for some kids. It doesn't work for every child, because I wouldn't do well if it was on a computer. It just doesn't compute. I'm sorry, it doesn't. I need to see it in print to be able to comprehend it. So it doesn't work for every student, but some students thrive in that environment, and they can move as fast as they want through the curriculum. And if they want to do it in 6 months, they don't have to do anything for the rest of the year. Or they could finish early because they've completed all of the, what do they call those? Matrix, I can't think of what they call them. Anyway, they're little compartmentalized learning modules. And so that's one thing. And then we started into all these scholarships. First, there was one for children with disabilities called the McKay Scholarship, but they had to attend a private school that met all of the requirements. And that worked really well for some students, but there were other students who didn't do well in that environment. So I began to drip on Andy Gardner. And I said, of all the people in the state of Florida that we need to do something for, it's those kids with disabilities whose parents are struggling financially and they need help with therapies. And in 2013, he created a pilot program that just served a few students. And then in 2014, we went full force, and the Gardner Scholarship was put into statute to serve home educating parents with children with disabilities. The program was so popular because it served students so well. Students with disabilities often don't do well in a classroom, and yet in the public schools, they're required to mainstream those students. And we've heard horror stories because that child has so much sensory input that they're already dealing with. And then you put them in a classroom with 20 other kids that are making noises and all these things going on in the classroom, and it just about sends them over into being crazy. And so they'll make noises and all sorts of things in the classroom. So those things don't work for every child. And so being at home with your parents with a regular routine that can be controlled both from diet and from therapies has just been an enormous blessing for those children. And then we came along with the PEP program, and it was implemented last year, was not carefully thought through. It was just ran through with the basic things. And there were some issues, but the issues that are being portrayed as problems in the scholarship really aren't problems in this scholarship. They are, the expenditures were made by a parent off of the list in the purchasing guide. They were allowed to purchase it, and it had to be approved for their child. And so the parents were following the guidelines that were set out for them. And now, because there's a couple of bad press articles, the legislature's out to fix the problem. And so the
So
language.
that's what 1403 is aiming to do, right? Because that's what you started talking about where this was going was it what they're trying to accomplish with 1403 is that, right? Covering the bad press, fixing some of those glitches, if you will, or clarity, add clarity is what they try to say. But, so that's really what you're saying is the focus of 1403, right?
Well, 1403 has language in it regarding the instructional materials that worked fine. It didn't have digital materials in there, so you couldn't buy a computer. So we were going to push to get that included because it makes no sense to allow you to buy
Certainly.
digital materials if you don't have anything to show them on, or you have an outdated computer, or you have two kids on PEP and they both need to use a computer. But they didn't have that. So we thought we were just going to be asking for a few additional things to be put into the language. And then it turned out that when HB 1403 was filed, they added language in that said because of what had happened and the media was pushing this narrative that they were going to fix the perception that the program needed some fixing, and that the language that they put in is that equipment purchased as instructional materials could only be in the subject areas of math, science, language arts, and
Social studies.
what?
Social
Social
studies.
studies.
And social studies. And well, that doesn't help parents who initially took the PEP because most of them were already taking means to find curriculum, whether it was used curriculum, whether they made up their own curriculum or got curriculum online free, whatever they did, they were managing to get curriculum. But what most of the parents that applied for the PEP wanted were items they couldn't afford. They wanted to be able to give their child music lessons. And if they like guitar, buy them a guitar. Maybe not the most expensive guitar, but one they could practice on.
Right.
So if you had a child that, had a special interest in some sport, maybe they need certain equipment for that sport, and you could buy helmets or knee pads or whatever you needed. But they've limited that so that you can't purchase anything that isn't connected to a curriculum that is in those four areas. So our recommendation has been that they limit the expenditure over a certain amount. We pick $1,500. It could be $1,000. And you have to fill out one of those educational benefit forms through Step Up, I think that's what it's called, to justify an expenditure that's more than whatever amount of money that the legislature agrees on.
Right.
And then everything else under that would just be paid. We wouldn't have
So,
to
Brenda, most people haven't necessarily read CSHB 1403 to get the language, and they definitely haven't seen what we wrote. Do you want me to read what we suggested to them?
No, I think the overview's fine.
Okay. Keep going.
Basically the language just is what it was already in there, but they added the equipment part that I just talked about. Our suggestion is just to put in an amount of money that would just cover whatever you wanted to spend it on. That's educational and in the purchasing guide. And then anything over that amount of money, then you would have to get prior approval for to get reimbursed. It would speed up the opportunity for parents to get reimbursed faster if the 200 different processors didn't have to look at every single expenditure, and we get different outcomes, and then the money doesn't flow back to the parents. There's just a lot of micromanaging that's in this process that doesn't need to be in the process. They just need to let parents spend it on the things that are approved to spend it on in the purchasing guide. and approve anything over $1,500.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be our recommendation, both for streamlining the process and for helping the media not have something to talk about.
Well, they're always going to have something to talk about. When you have an agenda, you'll pick anything and make a problem out of it. Yeah, it makes you look important.
The other thing that we want to put into this bill
Mm-hmm.
is the definition that was originally in the purchasing guide for a home education instructional program, because I had worked with Step Up and the home education instructional programs for over 6 months to come up with that definition,
Mm-hmm.
because those groups have kind of a unique place in the homeschool community. And then after they were operating under that definition for about maybe 4 or 5 months, we started working on the definition as soon as the bill passed in March. It didn't go into effect until July, but I was working with Step Up because in the past, I just vetted the organizations, the home education instructional programs, and told Step Up which ones to put on the list for the FESUA, for the disability scholarship. But they said, well, we need a more formal definition. And so we worked on it and came up with it. And they were using that in the implementation of this HB1, the bill last year. And then there were groups that decided that they wanted to jump on the home education instructional bandwagon, because actually they were private schools, many private schools, and there were variations on what they looked like, but they met twice a week or maybe 3 times a week. Some of them were full-time programs, meeting 5 days a week, but they didn't own a private school. They were using other facilities, and so they call themselves home education instructional programs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the main problem was Step Up was, because the definition was not in statute, and we had just worked to come up with that definition. They had nothing to stand on.
Mm-hmm.
And
When you say
so
they, you mean
She means Step Up, because
Step
when
Up.
when other
Mhm.
organizations started pushing for, like, well, why can't we be included in this? We're a home
Mhm.
education instructional program. They didn't have a statute to fall back on. They only had their own definition in the purchasing guide.
So they removed the part that I was really concerned about. I mean, there are other issues relating to this, like who are those groups if they do something to a child because they have them all day long. There are issues there. They were not fingerprinted. But the main thing that I was really upset about, and we agreed, Jason and Crystal and I agreed, that it opened the door for some really serious crimes to be committed,
Mm-hmm.
without naming them here.
Sure, we
If
can't. Yeah,
if
don't.
they remove the non-residential part of that definition,
Right.
then that's what they push for, so that they could run their quote unquote school in the home.
And
Yeah,
the
and
and the
that
real okay. The
uh,
the real risky part about that is that they're not home education. They're, like you said, more like private schools, but slipping in as home education. And when something does inevitably go wrong, the black eye would belong to home education.
right.
And we're really trying to make sure we separate that out to avoid, future issues where regulations come in to control those programs um, that aren't really home education to begin with, and then end up inadvertently creating other restrictions or regulations for home education as a whole. So That has been something that's been crucial. Crystal, go. What were you going to
Oh,
say?
I was just going to say that there's a whole array of concerns with removing the non-residential. Not only that there's no regulation to protect children in those environments, but there's also zoning issues. There's all kinds of things.
Certainly.
And like Jason said, if they're calling themselves home education instructional programs, if the media had a field day with what's been spent for PEP, imagine what they would do if it hit the
Yeah.
news that some egregious crime was committed in a home education instructional program, even though technically these are full-time drop-off programs mimicking a private school,
Hmm.
but without meeting the regulations for private schools. So that was the concern and why Brenda felt it was so important to get a definition in statute for what a home education instructional program is, which would
Right.
include that non-residential criteria.
Certainly. So we do have some questions. Deline asks, when will your proposed wording be presented to the House/members, and when will we know what they actually push through? Take it, Brenda.
We've been meeting with different members of the committees as it's gone through the process, as much as we can get in. I've never, as I've told Jason, I've never had a year where it was as difficult to get in to meet with somebody as it has been this year.
It's been
And
challenging.
most of the appointments that we've had have been after the committee meeting, which is not helpful. We needed it before the committee meeting so that they
Right.
could make, adjustments or amendments going into the
Mhm.
committee meeting. So what we've had to do in this environment is just stand up and tell them our issues in a 2-minute or 3-minute opportunity in a committee meeting,
And then
which
watch them pat themselves on the back during debate. That was frustrating. Sorry. Sorry. Keep
I
going.
think we've encountered some members who understand our issue and want to help, but this seems to be an initiative that is coming from the speaker's office, and I don't know whether that's language that he put forth or his staff put forth, but they're sticking to it in the House. And so
Mhm.
our next strategy is
Yeah.
to go to the Senate and try to work the Senate and see if when the bill comes over from the Senate, it will have to be referred to committees in the Senate, and maybe I don't know what kind of backdoor deals they've made, but if they haven't made a deal with the Senate president on this bill, we might be able to get our wording in on that side.
Mm-hmm. So Rachel Weinbarger says, I think I'm a little confused about HB 1403 now. She says, is it still considered materials and equipment for the 4 core subjects and going to cover the classes for electives, but not the equipment? I'm just trying to make sure I understand it correctly still.
Okay,
S-
I can take that one if you.
yeah, go ahead.
So the language in 1403 only restricts equipment used as instructional materials. They have not placed a restriction on any of the other categories that were in statute. So they haven't restricted curriculum, they haven't restricted class tuition and classes. The problem is that instructional materials, like if you look at Step Up's purchasing guide, 90% of what's in their guide is under the umbrella of instructional materials, which would include PE and music lessons, but they're not restricting instructional materials to those 4 subjects. They're restricting equipment used as instructional materials.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question in my question that I still haven't had answered by anybody is what's the definition of
Equipment.
equipment?
Right.
But the classes and lessons are clearly not equipment. So those will not be
Right.
limited by this. But just depending on how they decide to define equipment, that may include things like art supplies. It may include
Mm-hmm.
things like basic materials for those subjects. Like
Mm-hmm.
anything outside of the 4 core that are listed might become at risk for whether it's covered anymore.
And
That's
sorry.
but the classes and lessons are not at risk right now with the current wording. Those would still
Mm.
be covered.
And it's interesting because when we have had the chance to speak with some of them, it's pretty clear that the language is challenging. It's creating a gaping hole in what they all agree is a well-rounded education for the students, but they just can't have the equipment. And it is the wording is problematic. But rather than strike it and say, hey, let's get it right next session, they're just trying to ram it through as is and then tweak it again next session. And
Yeah,
I don't think that
and the
that's going to
examples
work.
that they're giving for equipment are things like, well, we all heard the horse example, right? Even though live animals were never an approved purchase through Step Up. And then they've given the example recently of buying a car for driver's ed, which
Yeah, someone mentioned that in comments
I
before I
don't
got to it.
think anybody ever tried to get approved as a purchase. So they're using these very hyperbolic examples,
Hmm.
um, rather than, in my opinion, and I'm trying to be, you know, careful with how I say this, but there hasn't been a lot of honest, open discourse with the parents that are expressing their concerns. They're just
Right.
holding to the language and then giving hyperbolic examples of like why the language needs to be there.
Hmm.
Um, anyway,
And like you said, a lot of hyperbole is being used and fear of what people might use the funds on as the rationale for creating this. And then the other part that's problematic is they keep comparing home education students to public school students. Like, well, children in public school don't get this. Children in public school don't have that. And one of the faults I think is trying to even conceptualize that home education is public school at home. I think that's probably number one fallacy. And the issue, and this is one of the reasons why when we put out the post that we put out, was it last week or the week before, where we asked for people to share their experiences home educating families and how they're using the scholarship funds at home to create those elective experiences and those learning moments is because the representatives really do not have an idea. Like whenever I say, "Oh, a burger is delicious," you think of something, whether it's like Burger King burger or McDonald's or a homemade one or like my grandma used to make. You have something is called the mind a visual. Right. They don't actually have that because most of them don't have experience with home education firsthand. They hear about it in bits and pieces through maybe someone on the staff, perhaps. I mean, I think only one of them has someone on staff. In the most recent subcommittee meeting, I believe only Franklin, Representative Franklin, has a background that personally includes home education. So most of them just don't have a grasp at all or a visual that comes to mind. So when we were asking for those comments, that's one of the reasons why, because conflating public education and home education as public school at home is one of the key problems that I think moving forward is going to make it harder to get the electives put back in because they're going to go, oh, well, if we are going to do this for home education families, we have to do it for public school kids first and give them all this stuff. And it's going to make a blockade in between trying to get what's already there put back in. Um, so, were you going to say something, Brenda? Sorry.
Um, I was going to say the other misconception that they have is that, oh, well, we can go to the public school and use their equipment, but that really doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense because if a child wants to take guitar lessons, they're not going to be able to go to the public school and practice guitar
Right.
um, if they don't have a guitar at home. That's just one small example. And the fact is that PEP students aren't even allowed to go to the public school at this time because there's no contract for public
Yes.
schools to take private money for
Mm-hmm.
classes that are provided free to the state of Florida. So there's a bit of a legal issue involved there. And I've worked with a couple of
Right.
districts, the associate superintendent, And they said, we don't mind serving the students, but we don't have a mechanism to take the money, and the law says they're supposed to pay. So that's another big issue that we're trying to deal with in this bill, that the legislators don't even know exists. They do now because I told them about it, but in the committee meeting,
Right.
although they didn't seem to understand what I was talking about.
Yeah, and to add to that, some families are home educating because the public school environment is not a healthy environment for their children.
Mm-hmm.
So, this blanket assumption that every PEP family can just go take those things at a public school if they really want those classes. Some of us choose not to use the public school system for valid reasons. So that might be that to me, that's just another gap in the understanding to just assume that every public school, like every PEP family would just, okay, we'll just go take that at a public school. There's all kinds of reasons, even just for us, like we're a one vehicle family. If my husband has work meetings during the day, then any extracurriculars I do with my kids either have to be at home or
Mm-hmm.
in the off hours when school's already over. So
Right.
that might not be feasible for me. So the
Yeah.
flexibility that home educating and, PEP homeschooling families want and need is not really answered by that flippant,
No.
in my opinion, flippant suggestion to just,
No, and
"Well,
it's
just go
pretty
take it at a public
straightforward.
school."
If we wanted to put our kids in public school, we would have done that. We wanted to home educate them, and you gave this scholarship to home education. So stop doing that. That just doesn't make any sense. The hub has made a comment. It's kind of long, so I'm going to read it. Um, they say it was really insulting to hear some of the examples from representatives. Valdez said, "What are we going to do? Buy or rent a car when you learn to drive?" I realize some people really believe we are now a bunch of sides that someone needs to pick. Okay, but I would like to believe the less vocal majority wants all children served, and it simply won't look the same because children are different. This was awarded to low income families first, and rather than looking like beggars and demanding, we need to make sure they understand that we became unpaid private teachers. They overlook how many of us sacrificed a second income and extras for a decade to do this. In actuality, many of us have less resources than the typical public school can provide. Same amount of money spent will yield all sorts of different results. We could also fairly acknowledge some are exactly what they criticize, abusing privileges. But with all the controls in the system, how bad can it possibly be? It has taken 6 months for some of these reimbursements to even reach full circle. You're absolutely right. We did have a chance to say and voice some of these concerns that you just spoke to, especially the reimbursements part not being hit, the fact that bad actors are being curbed out, which honestly is the point of law, period, right? Is to curb bad acting. So we get it. We know there's going to be bad actors. That's an admission right out of the gate. But also that what they've done has gone too far. The wording is very, very poorly constructed. And rather than stop, take a step back, strike it, make it a go next session, do it right. I mean, my grandpa always said, if you got something that you have to do it right the first time. That's how I look at things. Um, that doesn't seem to be the same philosophy or approach that's being taken by the representatives. So I concur with you that it is frustrating, and being face to face with them in some of these meetings, it is. Some of them are genuinely there trying to help and listen. I will tell you that it's not like they're all just refusing to hear anything. It's been very difficult to try to get meetings with them. Some of the ones that we have managed to get, they've been good listeners. Some have not. Um, I'm assuming, because this is my first time through, I'm assuming that's par for the course, that some are in alignment and some are not. But Michelle Wilson asks, do you get a sense that it will affect things like desks, bookshelves, etc.? Something even more like supplies and furnishings.
I suspect that it could,
Hmm.
and we tried to handle that in some of the wording that we've proposed, um, because in Step Up's purchasing guide, all of those type of things, classroom furnishings, are in the instructional materials umbrella. So if they're limiting equipment used as instructional materials to only the 4 core subjects, then it becomes tricky to prove that this desk you're buying is specifically for math. Or, so I mean, you might be able to
Mhm.
argue, but it makes it, in my opinion, it opens the door to those things becoming excluded as well.
Right. Deline says Step Up has a lot of rules. You couldn't buy a horse, car, or any of their examples with the current rules. You're not wrong. That's why I said the thing
Yeah,
about
that
hyperbole when
hyperbolic,
I,
yeah.
yeah, whenever I spoke. But she says, I've been confused about that since the first meeting I watched. Why not the actual real examples of allowed spending that could have an argument of being excessive? Yeah, no one has actually put forward an argument from the guide. Oh, well, this is allowed and we don't think it should be. Everyone is using hyperbole
Yeah,
and
everyone
fear
seems to be
mongering.
using the news article media examples, things like, Disney passes, big screen TVs,
Mm-hmm.
which
Peloton bikes.
Peloton bikes.
Peloton bikes.
Peloton
Mhm.
bikes are one that has not been mentioned actually out loud in the committee,
Right.
but that has been mentioned behind the scenes to us. And that seems to be one that some of the legislators are really stuck on. Um, they didn't feel like that
Probably
was.
because they want a Peloton bike.
But if you look at Step Up's purchasing guide, exercise bikes, like it's a listed as an improved expenditure as long as the criteria that's given is it has to be appropriate for the child's age and size. So
Mm-hmm.
that, in my opinion, probably the reimburser who processed that, if it was for a teenager and they were able to justify that it fit the child's size and it was within the price range of what was allowed in the purchasing guide, then the fault really isn't on the parent
Mm-mm.
because they followed the criteria that were in the guide.
Mm-hmm.
But that discussion has not been fully had, at least not where, in the committee sessions, in the debate. That has not actually been brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that really what I think the legislators are upset about is the purchasing guides allowing things that they don't think should be allowed. It's not a
Yeah.
parent issue. But they're trying to control it by just putting it in statute to where the SFOs
Right.
cannot approve those types of things.
And I will add this, as a community, we have to do better. There are just some things that are a little embarrassing when we see these groups and everybody's there and somebody posts a picture of something and then says, "How do I get this covered? How do I get this reimbursed?" Like there are just some times where we need to. There's a purchasing guide for that, for one, and there are people on the calls that you can call and talk to and ask, for two. But sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when something like that gets screenshotted or snapped and then shared and then it turns into a big argument and somebody catches wind and decides to write an article on it and then it goes like wildfire. There are
Because
some
our
things that
Facebook pages are not private.
No.
I mean,
right.
People think they are, but they're not.
No.
Especially because there is always the option to screenshot. So even
Yeah.
if the group rules say don't screenshot, people still do. And so
Hmm.
even if it's a private group that you have to be a member of, that doesn't mean somebody in that group can't screenshot whatever it was and share it out somewhere.
Hmm.
So what's happening also is that homeschoolers are turning against each other. So some of these groups are taking screenshots from other groups and then sharing them like, look at what the people in this group are
Right.
trying to get approved. And
Right.
people are seeing that. Media is seeing that. It's possible that legislators are seeing that. So it's really not helpful. It's just not. It's creating the wrong impression that we're just trying to use the funds to get as much approved as possible, even though technically it's not an educational expense. And that's
Hmm.
not the impression that we want to be giving. Not if we're
Yeah.
hoping for these scholarships to be a sustainable resource for parents into the future.
Miranda, yeah, Miranda, I am going to come back to your question. I haven't forgotten about you. It's been a while. I just wanted you to know that. The questions that keep coming in are about this topic. So when we switch, I'll grab yours. But Christy says the bill's been very much taking the heat off of SFOs, and they're not meeting their contractual agreement as outlined in statute. This is true. She also says, have they required the SFOs to provide actual figures of what has been purchased and approved that the reps think are excessive? Um, I don't know whether or not they have required the SFOs to do that and whether the SFOs have provided that, but I can tell you that my conversations with the representatives do not reflect that they are informed by any of that information. Um, it seems that they're more informed by the hyperbole or what's getting passed around, and it's like, oh my goodness, a horse, yeah, no way, no one needs that. And all of them have to seem to have the same reference points in their conversations, but none of that seems to be coming from actual purchasing guide language or anything like that. So I can't say for certain that they've not been given it, but it doesn't reflect in their conversations that I see it. So she goes, I don't think that they're capable of providing this info. They might. I think they are, but it would distract from their objective of getting reimbursements processed and people paid. So back to Miranda. Miranda says, if the Senate path doesn't change anything, Brenda, how do special sessions work? Is that an option?
It's not an option. Our next step would be to see if we can get the governor to veto the bill. The governor was behind the concept of providing scholarships to home education students in the first place. And the speaker took the issue on, and basically he was the one that pushed the bill through last year. And originally they wanted it given to home education families. And so HB1 was originally written and put into the home education law. And I went to the governor's office and talked to the chief of staff and said, this isn't something home educating families want. They'd rather have their freedom than money.
Yep.
And here's what I suggest. And basically suggested that they create a new category in the way to meet compulsory attendance, which they did. And I believe that the governor had influence on that. The speaker, when I got a chance to talk to him, not at length, but I said the same thing to him. And he told me to work with staff. And so we came up with the category of personalized education program, separate and apart from home education.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the governor is interested in this program. Whether it's his top priority this time, I don't know, but it certainly was last session. And I think that if we can't get amendments in the Senate to 1403, or go into another bill with different language, and they just leave 1403 on the table in the committee, that can happen. They just drop the bill and it never goes forward. Maybe we can get them to do that in the Senate because there's such an outcry of displeasure with this bill. It's hard to say whether that would actually happen or not, because I don't know what deals the Senate president and the House Speaker have made. A lot of time they'll say, well, I'm going to work on this. You take this bill and then I'll take your bill. So I don't think this is a high priority bill. I think that the bill that reduces regulations on the public school is a higher priority. But I don't know what kind of, and they always have trading chips, that they'll hold out so they can get what the other chamber wants at the end. But I do think that there are some senators on that side, and even Senate staff, that are listening to what we have to say and understand the dilemma. So if we can't get it worked out on the Senate, we plan to meet with some senators as soon as we can get appointments. We've reached out to some of them. Is that our next step would be to try and get the governor to veto the bill. It does have some good parts in it. It does increase the percentage of, let me see how to say this. the percentage of students that apply for the FESUA has gone up. That's a good thing, but we could live without that this year because they opened up in the special session the waiting list, so everybody should be in the program as of today that wanted to get in the program. And then there's in law, I think it's a 3% increase every year, and they bumped that up to 5. That's a good thing, but it's not something that we would hang on to so tight that we wouldn't, that it would keep us from asking the governor to veto the bill. So we would put an all-out push on the governor's office if we can't get it worked out in between. There's a lot of work between now and the time that it actually passes in the legislature.
Anthony, I'm sorry.
We still have some maybe open doors of changing some opinions. I don't think it'll change the bill in the House, but they might be more willing to negotiate if the Senate comes up with some good language. So there's a lot of strategy that still is to be figured out, but we got to figure out who our supporters in leadership are and who's willing to go to bat for us.
Yeah. Michael Anthony says, if the budget is capped, why is oversight necessary? Really, think about it. We have asked that question too. If it's about fiscal responsibility, you've spent $8,000 per student regardless. Like, it doesn't change the fiscal amount of money that you've handed out. You've given the scholarship to the child already and already given it a set amount. So we see your point. We've passed it on to the representatives. Just know that there are many of the things that you all are mentioning. We have actually had these conversations with them. So just to let you know, your voice is being carried on to them in those ways. I did speak with a previous senator this past week, and he kind of did give me an insight, and he said that the home education community struggles to get attention sometimes, and that's because we don't contribute to the campaigns, the campaign funds like the charter schools do or the private schools, etc. And he made a valid point, and I'm not saying that to say go out and contribute to the campaign funds of these different representatives, but there does need to be something on our end that they value, that we bring to the table, that we have as a leveraging point when we say, hey, we would like to sit down with you. There needs to be a recognition point. And Brenda pointed out, as I was sharing that conversation with her, she pointed out that we have sometimes had people who are manpower. They're volunteers. They're in the Capitol. They're helping. Some of them, I think we do even have some now, a few here and there, that are aides for some of the representatives. Things like this do go a long way. So if you do know someone who's interested in maybe they can't donate to a campaign, but they're interested in being a part of and helping any of their representatives in their areas as home education families, that would be something that would be good for us to know about so that we can help make connections for you, so that we have a visible spot, right, at the table where people can see and recognize home education and value it as well as we do, if that makes sense.
Well, one of the other main things that in the early days, because nobody understood home education and we had no political clout, is I encouraged families, as I went around the state talking to support groups, to get out and work for their campaign, for somebody that's running in the campaign that supports freedom of education or home education at that time, and get their kids involved. And if you can't support a candidate, let me just say this, that's a Christian, and you want to home educate your children, they go work in the other campaign, because we win both ways as far as
Mm-hmm.
having connections to that legislator.
Mm-hmm.
And I've walked campaigns until my hips hurt, to tell you
Mm-hmm.
the truth. In the early days, I would connect with a homeschooler that got the vision that they could make a difference. We could get a candidate elected that maybe not have the most money, but if you go knock on doors and you pass out literature to them, it makes a huge impression on the person that is getting that literature. I
Mm-hmm.
know that it's been maybe 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer, when the campaign was run, but one of the youngest representatives elected to the House had been homeschooled. She was young. I mean, she was like 21 when she was elected, maybe 22. But she had one of the homeschool organizations that comes to the Capitol Teen Pack. She had worked with them and written some literature for them to help understand how to win a political campaign. And Jennifer Sullivan had walked her district 3 times. Those kids got out and beat on doors. She didn't have much money, but she won because they had a team of people out knocking on doors. And
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten inroads with number of candidates because I went and walked their campaigns. So if we had an army of people across the state in this upcoming election choosing candidates that support their causes, out walking door to door with their children, that makes a huge impression.
Mm-hmm.
Take your kids and make it a Saturday morning outing,
Mm-hmm.
where
And
you're
get school
knocking
credit
on.
for it.
Yes, you can. Bright futures. You can make a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous difference in whether you have a voice when it comes to bills being changed and heard, because
Yes.
you've invested in these candidates just like people that give money. They can raise money but easier than they can get
Mm-hmm.
volunteers to walk. So we really have an open door there to get our voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes I think the thing that this person said to me was, "Oh, that person's not booked up for 2 weeks. They're just booked up for 2 weeks for you." And then he levied that conversation about home education families not, home education community not being as supportive as other things like charter schools and things like that. And so I thought, well, I'll take that black eye and I will pass that along and see if we cannot make a dent in that. So that's good. Melissa Stanchek, or sorry, Michael Anthony says, I don't know if we can request a freedom of information on the cost of oversight because it's run by a nonprofit. Is that by design? Um, I don't know. Nonprofit. Well, I mean, nonprofits are required to show their books, but or public. I think that they're
I
just
don't
wanting
I don't
to.
think the oversight is the issue here.
Yeah. No. No, I don't think so. Can you walk us through the timeline of when, this is Melissa, she says, can you walk us through the timeline of when the bill will get to the governor desk? Like how many steps to the end? What does the phase from here look like in big picture
Well,
timeline?
first the bill has to get to the House floor. I don't know whether it'll be on the calendar for this week. They generally set the rules calendar the afternoon before, or maybe at the most 2 days, and they meet
Mm-hmm.
after session and set the calendar. There, I looked yesterday. I haven't looked today, but it isn't agendaed anywhere at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah,
depends on whether the first step is it's got to get out of the house. So then it goes to the House floor whenever it's put on the agenda. And then it has to get on special order calendar to be heard. If it gets on special order calendar, they debate it on the floor. The first time it would be actually the second reading, and then they can add amendments on that day. And then the third day would be to vote on the bill. So at least that's a week. It could be 2 weeks to get it to that point. I have no idea. They kind of set all that behind closed doors. I mean, they put the calendar out, but who decides which bills are going to be on the calendar doesn't seem to be something that they broadcast ahead of time.
So, Brenda, I'm looking at the Senate bill tracker for 1403, and it says that it was bill added to the special order calendar. And then
Okay,
it
is
says
that in the House?
House bill added to special order calendar 2/1/2024.
So,
But I'm not sure where to find it on the actual calendar, but that's what it says on the bill tracker.
okay, well, I didn't see that. I looked at the bill last night, and I didn't see that it had said that. So, like I said, some of these things kind of happen magically, and we don't see it ahead of anybody else out there watching this process. So if it's on special order, they're going to hear it the next time the House comes into session. And I'm not looking at a calendar, so I don't know when that's going to be. I think tomorrow from 3 to 6. But then when they pass it, it'll go over to the Senate. The Senate then refers it to committees because there's no companion bill. And again, it's based on what the agreements are between the House and the Senate leadership. They would have to agenda it for a committee meeting. And then it should be referred both to pre-K through 12 Education Committee and the Appropriations Committee. So that would be 2 stops. And then it would go to the Senate floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the Senate floor, after that is the next stop, the governor's office.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I hate to cut things short, but it is 1 o'clock, and I know that we have to get to other calls. Katie Lane says, we already have a sign out in our yard supporting our homeschooling-friendly school board member running for re-election. Help with petitions, volunteer your time. Absolutely. Also, Katie Lane, I noticed that you followed us over on YouTube, which is excellent and awesome as well there. As if some of you don't know, you can get the playback for this either on Facebook or on YouTube. I could potentially also add Rumble if anybody likes Rumble in particular. It's a little bit of extra work, but it's not too much extra work. So if you are like, oh my goodness, I hate YouTube, love Rumble, do it on Rumble, then post that in the comments so that I'll know that that's where you kind of want me to move the focus to. I'm just trying to find the place where the most people are and that's easiest to create the content where people can follow it and find it, because some of this stuff happens so fast, and I want to make it easily referable. Thank you again to all of our sponsors, especially those on the recognition wall. We've had some new ones. Joanne Stead was recently added. We had another one. I'm still waiting on a logo for them, so I can't quite announce them effectively. Brenda, is there anything you want to say before we count it out for today?
I think the best thing to do for them to be sure and follow the forum. And if we have any request or calls to action, once we get a lay of the land this week, Jason, then we will be posting.
We will
in the forum.
Mm-hmm. And make sure that you, if you haven't filled out the contact form, fill out the contact form, and at the very least, subscribe to the what is it, the messaging or the feed. That way, whenever we do put out a blog post update as well, those can kind of come straight into your email and notify you. If you're not necessarily following the forums, we try to do it and put the information in a number of ways so that we can make sure people have access to it and it's easily shareable. Sometimes the blog post is a little bit better just because you don't have to have a login to share it anywhere for anyone to see it. But the forums are good because one, it's a little bit deeper of an impact for community, then the information is accessible all within that, and it facilitates more interaction, not just like announcements. So whichever method is we're going to use them both, at least for the time being. But keep your eyes out. We will be putting information up. So I don't see any more questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and count us out. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you for following along with us. We are still trying to raise some of the support. So if you have friends who you know are like, oh, we're just waiting for this to happen or that, like, go ahead and let them know they can start sponsoring and supporting now, because we do need it. Without further ado, it is 1 p.m. and I'm gonna let you guys get back to your beautiful Monday and wish you all the best. Have an awesome day.